Chapter 3. Today I watched my best friend die. Alex stopped writing and looked at the words. They were true, but cold as he read it back in his head. Eli didn't make it back this time. Alex put a line through the previous sentence. I don't know what went wrong. In a moment he was wounded. It was my mistake for not turning the wheel hard enough. My fault for agreeing with that way of escape. Don't know how he escaped Janet and made his way back to the assassin. Determination. He drew in a sigh and brought a hand to his face. He was planted next to the wreckage of the port side. Some of the smaller holes let cool air in that made the pages of his journal flap. He wanted to give up, but he set the pencil back down to the page. My best friend is wrapped in a bag and in an ammo closet. I'm still piecing together what he did, why he did it. Before he died, he told me he knew. Knew what? Knew his gun was empty? Knew he was going to die regardless? Knew he had that assassin cold? I don't understand why he would do that. The more he thought about Shea Vito slicing through Eli's clothing and chest, the more he wanted to fling his journal across the hold. A short trip that was meant to be a break for his team had turned into a nightmare, and everyone was sharing in the anger from the lost. No one spoke to each other. The hell chopper reverberated the sound of its two remaining engines. Janet and Dylan were cleaning their weapons. Alex assumed Layla, Tyler, and Brandon were catching a rest. Jack was in the cockpit flying for Tommy, while he and Otto wrenched on the closest engine using the convict's rappelling cord. Alex stuffed his journal by his waist and stood up. As he stretched and let out a yawn, he realized he had not slept in at least 2 days. The chopper had 2 small bunk rooms that were more like storage closets you had to squeeze into. Both rooms had 2 bunks, each with 4 beds. The team hot bunked for the most part. When one woke up, another would take their place. Alex didn't really mind as he opened the door to an empty bunk room. He knew Layla was in the other, but didn't feel like waking the others up with their antics. Who am I kidding? I'm not in that kind of mood right now. Jack's plan had shot a missile into their progress. Alex pulled himself to the top bunk and laid his head back. Pain was tugging at him. There was no anger. He had his revenge on Shea Vito. Sadness hadn't caught up to him yet. Alex could only feel the cold eating away at his stomach, helplessness tearing through his mind. It felt wrong that he was breathing on a bunk and his friend was hidden away as a corpse. I'm not going to get any sleep. He pulled his body upwards. He knew he needed to speak with the old man, but he had nothing to say and was certain Jack didn't have the answers he needed. In that moment, the door propped open. It was Tyler. Thought you were sleeping, Alex said, tossing his head back down on the pillow. About an hour, maybe 2. How long have you been up? Tyler said as he moved into the room and grabbed a seat on the bunk opposite of Alex. Too long. I tried writing a bit, but, well, there's not many ways to describe how your best friend got murdered, Alex explained. Tyler didn't immediately respond. He, like Eli, was one of the first to question Jack's motives at the start of all this. That was some crazy shit down there. We've never seen fighting like that. Not even at home, Tyler started. I still don't know how we made it out. I saw that missile slam right into the bird. When it did, I thought you were all gone, Alex replied. Tommy is a hell of a pilot, I'll give him that much. And you pulled off a hell of a maneuver to get you away from the bulk of the Chinese. Not everyone got out, Ty. I didn't do enough. This shit is turning out just like I feared. And the fucking old man, Alex trailed. Look, Alex, I don't think he'd throw us into the fire on purpose. He didn't know, just like us. If he did, he wouldn't have gone down there with you, Tyler said. Almost a month ago you wanted to tear his head off, Alex replied. Jack has his flaws, but so do I. It's hard for me to blame that man for making mistakes when we shared the same bottle. What are you telling me, Ty? Alex asked. That I'm in this, fully committed, to the end. Doesn't matter what happens. Alex sat up at that. Eli died, believing his sacrifice was one more step to a home we've never known. I won't let what he did be in vain. We haven't always agreed completely, especially when we were younger. But we've got half the world after us now, all for trying to make it better. I don't know any one man that can stand against armies, but if it boils down to just the two of us, now I'll be running into hell beside you, Tyler explained. Alex gave his friend of many years a nod. I know. How much longer, Tom? Jack asked over the comm. Could be another hour before Engine 3 is back up. 4 needs too much work, and reaching it has proven to be a cunt. Jack sipped from his flask with one hand and glided the control stick with the other. Just do what you can, then get back inside, he replied softly. Yeah, you got it, Tommy cut back. Jack clicked the comm off, then went back to his flask. Flying hellchoppers had dominated most of his work with Morrison, flying or riding in them. Jack was one of the few soldiers with piloting expertise after the war. Earning status and keeping low was just a matter of the positions he took. Back home, those that followed or served with Morrison were given one of 3 classifications: orange, blue, and diamond. The rich and Morrison's Marines were all awarded orange for their contributions to the New World. Jack's exploits with pilot training yielded him a blue pass, a higher standard, with diamond being the highest. Jack spat into a corner as he thought how Morrison separated people from money as a king would. It was disgusting. The standards of living were better, but the poor were still crushed under his tyranny. The higher reaches of the skyscrapers that towered over Morrison's city were exclusive to those with blue passes. Jack remembered his luxurious suite, the built-in bar, his military garb fresh and clean every day. The space only allowed Marine officers, mercenaries, and those with just a little bit more money or influence than those in orange. Jack tucked his flask in his pocket. He didn't know much about Morrison's diamond confidants as he would have liked to. His assumption was that they were generals, family members, and again those who could afford it. He did know, however, that each could speak with the man whenever they wished, a tool he had used with Nyala in her stint as Advisor Patterson. Jack let out a sigh. Now, his connections meant nothing. The old days were catching up to him at the worst possible time. Morrison was drawing in closer all the time, and if this team had been branded international terrorists, then official aid from anywhere was sure to be denied. Shazari was most likely lost or already dead. The only thing that mattered to Jack was getting the remainder of the team home for the mission. He understood that every second that they weren't in a secure location could be their end, especially in this vulnerable state. "Come in," he yelled, hearing a rap at the cockpit door. Alex entered, followed by Koslov and Layla. "How are the repairs?" Alex asked. "They're shit, kid, but it looks like we'll make it to Tianjin," Jack replied. "Great. That's great." Alex's voice did not carry as it normally would. Mikhail had some information he wanted to share. The shadow stepped forward while Alex took a step back. "I was able to compile information on Che Vido. He is a former ranger turned bounty hunter. He also did not leave the rangers on his own accord. Vido frequently employed violent methods of elimination. There are also files pertaining to his mental status relating to the paraphernalia he carried. He had been reprimanded several times for using his parang in combat." Mikhail's eyes flickered. "He failed several psychological tests which they used to oust him. Vito left without incident, though he has not discriminated against any of his former colleagues in his new profession." "Meaning?" Jack asked. "There are several dead rangers on the list of known murders he has committed, amongst other affluent targets. This is his first Morrison contract," Mikhail finished. "Maury has no connection to him. This man had to come recommended," Jack mused. "How do you know this, Captain Newsom?" the Shadow asked. "Because Morrison doesn't outsource, ever. He brings people into his fold under his name. people knew how much of that private army of his was bought and paid for, the rest of the world would shit. Ex-military from some of the standing countries even lined up to join his Marine program, Jack explained. Irrelevant, Mikhail responded. Morrison is the largest standing force left in the world. It's not about the size. It's about optics. Those soldiers don't come in using their private company's names or their heritage as their banner. They're all Morrison's Marines now. If Morrison is bringing in an assassin, it means even he has outside support. There's more going on here than we know, Alex added. That is a fair assessment, Alexander. Perhaps Captain Newsom would care to elaborate, Mikhail said. The old man shook his head. I just know it doesn't spell out anything good for us, especially if we've been labeled. That's not for us to worry about right now. We need to get out of here, get back home. Alex and Mikhail turned from the controls, but Layla stayed behind and moved towards the controls where Jack sat. Can you teach me to fly this? She asked. Jack gave her a cockeyed look, but she just stared back down at him. While the old man had his own reservations about the team, he did like the kid's girl, even if she had put a gun to his head the first time they met. Sure, kid, he replied, his voice trailing off in the details of the control system. Off near the cockpit door, Alex was conferring with Mikhail. More information starting to flood back? Alex asked the shadow. Slowly, yes, Mikhail responded. The memories of my past life come back in flashes, but everything after my augmentation. He said the word with an emotionally disgusted tone Alex had not heard from the even-voiced man since they had met. I remember clearly. Grabbing what you did from the base must have helped then, Alex replied. Time has also aided the process. Mikhail motioned towards the door so as not to interrupt Layla's interest. Alex followed him out the cockpit door and toward one of the weapon benches. What do you mean by flashes? The younger man asked. The database has no knowledge on that, Mikhail replied. I didn't ask the computer, I asked you. The shadow paused for a moment, staring across the workbench at Alex. They are like dreams, yet they appear at inopportune times. At Severnaya it happened before Lieutenant Johnston drugged me. Explains why the doc was able to bring you down. Do you know what triggers them? Alex asked. It is my hypothesis that objects that I viewed during the traumatic events that led to my rebirth can activate these flashes. Severnaya contained many. But until the flash happens, Alex trailed. Yes, I have no recognition of those objects, Mikhail cut him off. I assume it to be an unintended side effect. It does present an interesting possibility, however. The shadow pulled his handgun from his chest holster and set it on the bench, beginning the process of ejecting the clip and disassembly. And that is? Alex asked. The ability to relive moments of my past life. His voice was devoid of excitement. Perhaps there are places in this world, places I was deployed, stationed, that will bring bits of my life back to me. Other information too, it seems. But why continue down the path they trained you for? Alex asked. If the fire rained down on the earth, I knew my database would soon become irrelevant because of old data. I needed to keep it updated, and I needed to find a way to make my presence known to my people. Finding work as an assassin was simple. Do you think that might point to your experience from before? No. I have been able to ascertain that I was nothing more than a soldier. One who knew how to survive in extreme situations and could ignore emotional attachments. From what I understand of the process, they did not need the best soldier, though they recruited many. They required the right biology, and who better to choose from than those who deal in and receive pain, Mikhail continued. Whatever training program they put you through worked. You move in unusual ways. Even Elias didn't move like you. Alex shot a glance towards his rifle, lying beside the workbench, and began his own disassembly process. It is all I know. Mikhail polished the pistol's exterior with the cloth. I have no worry about family or friends.
Operating alone never lets me worry about other soldiers or team members. They needed my ability to survive. The torture was what came back at Severnaya. Ice picks they lodged into my chest. Escape attempts that failed every time.
Not something I can imagine. Alex placed his rifle down and looked at Mikhail. My life has had some rough spots, but what they did to you.
No, this is something we both share.
Mikhail set his clip back inside the pistol.
You are a man who has lost, and had the fear of death taken from you. That happens to no one unless they bear scars from the past. In the face of extreme pain and trauma, those that march forward have allowed psychosis to rise.
Alex wasn't sure he understood what Mikhail meant. He did know that he preferred keeping his youth a secret, but the Shadow, the team's enigma, had opened his own past to him. There are a lot of kids in New Purgatory that grew up without parents, brothers, sisters. Before this mission, Eli, Layla, Tyler, and a few others who aren't with us anymore were the only people I could call family. Mikhail's eyes flickered as Alex continued. I was 5 years old when the bombs dropped. We didn't live in New Purgatory. We were far away. Alforna, I think?
California,
Mikhail replied. The Shadow's mind was reliving his mistake of pressing that button so many years ago. Yeah, that's it, Alex said, picking his rifle back up. Dad kept telling me how lucky we were, living in the middle of nowhere. To be honest, all I could remember was seeing clouds in the far horizon. When it was over, Dad and Mom tried their best to survive where we were. I still remember the faces of the people he turned away. They were looking for refuge, food, or a way to get to the last place society was thriving.
How did your family know how to get to New Purgatory?
Mikhail asked. Dad was a pilot, and we lived on an airstrip. 9 years later, someone got a hold of him over a ham radio, tried to give him proper charts and forecasts. The part that bothers me is the irony. Maybe my dad had an old buddy who was in the same branch as he was, or maybe it was like Jack said about Morrison not believing in outsourcing.
You believe your father was being recruited,
Mikhail stated. It makes sense. If there's anything Morrison has plenty of, it's birds, but he's never had enough pilots to fill the seats. Knowing what little I did about my dad, he probably decided right then to pack us up in one of his planes and fly us out. We never stopped once to look at the wreckage we saw over the states. We ran out of fuel by the time we hit New Purgatory. Alex set his gun down and reached for a gun and a cigarette in his jacket. He couldn't find a runway or raise anyone on the radio. He had to put us down on the 25 outside of Queens. Sheared off one wing on a light pole, which slowed us down long enough to slam into a collapsed building. When Mom and I woke up, we found that Dad didn't survive it. It took us both a long time to believe it. Alex exhaled fire from his lungs. By that time, Morrison began recovering weaponry and storage items no one could claim. Mom was in bad shape emotionally, but she kept going for a few more months. I remember hiding in a hole in the foundation of the apartment we were at, clinging to some old plumbing pipes. That's when Morrison's men broke through the door. They were going to take her and rape her, do whatever it was they did back then. She stabbed one with a steak knife before they trained guns on her. They didn't bother searching the apartment after that. I laid her to rest in the same spot Dad crashed. I made it a point to see it every year, except this one. Alex took a long pull from his smoke and held it in, staring down not at the workbench, but through it as he exhaled.
Not a normal childhood by pre-modern United States standards,
Mikhail replied. Like I would know any better. Look around you, Mikhail. Anyone that was born a few years before the bombs fell doesn't have any idea what the old world was like, Alex replied.
If only I could be the same,
Mikhail replied. Alex thought that was odd. The assassin rarely responded with his own wants. You almost sound like you don't want your old memories back, Alex noted.
I do, Alexander. But I also realized that if I had never been selected for what my current life has become, then I may have died during or before the bombing. It would cease this hunt, and the suffering that I no doubt endure but cannot feel, Mikhail answered. Alex pitied the man. In a way, they were similar, both searching for answers, trying to understand their past, and fighting a battle they might not win. Where the other saw a soulless killing machine, Alex saw a new friend. When we finish this, Mikhail, I'll do whatever I can to help you get your memory back, Alex said. Do you believe you can kill him? Mikhail asked. What probability does that computer of yours give you? I asked you, Alexander, Mikhail replied. Alex cracked a smile. I believe we're going to kill him, and then we're all going to walk away. Janet stewed at her weapon bench. She knew Dellen had come over to comfort her, but she would have none of it. The old doctor did not say a word. From time to time, she looked up from cleaning her rifle. Dellen's old, scarred hands were splayed out on the workbench, eyes closed and face downwards. She noticed his lips moving, but his voice was never loud enough to violate her work. Janet wanted to be angry with him, but thought that maybe he wasn't over here to comfort her. Maybe he was just another lost old man. You all right, Uncle Dell? She finally asked, loading the extended clip back into her rifle. I'm fine. Just saying a prayer for the boy, the doctor replied. Over here? She asked with anger in her voice. Is it bothering you? Dellen replied, raising his head slightly to meet her gaze. His asking made her hurt inside. She wanted to be alone, but Dellen's presence brought a comfort that she didn't want to go away. No, it's fine. I don't... Janet fought back the tears she considered weakness. I don't believe in it. Neither do I, Dellen said, but saying them makes me feel better. After he said that, he looked back down and went on with his mumbling. Janet was starting to realize that she was not the only person taking Elias's death hard. I didn't know him so well, but I wish I had. She continued to fight the anguish in her voice. Handsome, optimistic even if he didn't trust Jack. And now he's dead because the old man gambled and lost. Her expression turned from remorse to anger. Fucking Alex should have killed that bounty hunter. Sometimes it's worse to live in pain. You and the kid know that better than anybody, Dellen answered. Janet didn't feel like arguing with Dell. She was still feeling sick over holding off Chinese from the hell chopper. It had been a slaughter. Most of the soldiers were nothing more than kids slapped in armor 2 sizes too big, given weapons they could hardly lift, and then told to fight. He was too fucking confident, Janet said. Elias's last moments played out like tape in the back of her head. He had escaped her grip and snuck around the assassin. All the while Janet fell back and soldiers descended on her. She'd been looking forward to berating Eli for that. And now she'd never get the chance. We're all invincible until reality brings us back. Eli was a good kid. Would have died for any of us. He died thinking he bought time for us to escape. And that wasn't in vain, Dellen explained. He should have died with us. Not in China. Not like another one of Morrison's soldiers in the streets. He deserved better, Janet replied. Contrary to trendy belief, love, no one deserves a better death. There's no such thing. It's an end. You do what you can with the time you have. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you get to choose the way you go out. Eli went out helping us. Is that why you went back to London? Janet asked, easing the edge in her voice. Indeed. Between the times the bombs fell and before the first run through with Jack, I wondered what the hell happened to home. Jack taking me there was part of the reason I stayed behind for this fight. They let me see the ugly truth. For the longest time, I couldn't sleep at night. I felt sick, knowing that I had been saved,
while my people were left to die. I'm paying for my choice to go back, but the demanding work was what made me taste food again and let me take my 6 hours of sleep without waking up in a sweat," Dallin explained. The combat medic stood up straight, reaching into his old gray military jacket for a pill bottle. "There are a few times in my life I wish I could change, but running a clinic in a dead zone isn't one of them. Take my advice and don't let what happened eat at you. Do whatever it is you have to do to get better from it. Otherwise, it'll always be there, lingering," Dellin finished. "You make it sound easy, Uncle Dell," she replied. "It isn't, unless you have your little distractions." The doctor turned around and went back to whispering his hymn. Janet shook her head and went to work on another rifle. "We're all going fucking crazy." "Get up!" Talia screamed, jutting her blade towards a lone Chinese soldier. He had dropped his weapon in fear and was on his knees, bloodied and among the fallen of his platoon. "How many?" Talia yelled in Chinese. She had been successful at keeping their men out of Tianjin for almost a year, killing them one squad at a time. "You can't kill me if I tell you," he screamed back. His voice was young, but his cowardice did not appeal to her feelings. He was unholy in her eyes, as was all his kind. Talia moved in with her katana and flicked her wrist down, slicing through one of his hands. Blood spilled from his cut, and he screamed out again. "You have one chance," she said as she raised her blade to his face. The blood gleamed off her polished sword. 14 camp behind this building, near the diner." The soldier dropped his head as he began hyperventilating in pain and fear. Talia smiled, and then swung her blade down hard on the back of his neck. She turned and used the end of her robes to wipe the blood off. His death was a means to an end. Promises to the unworthy meant nothing in her eyes. There was only one word that was law: her lord. Talia climbed down the building's fire escape towards the secondary camp. The soldiers were, if anything, consistent with their belief that they could retake the port city. She knew her belief was stronger. They were camped as teenagers would. Alcohol was apparent by the empty bottles and the guns strewn about. From the inside of her robe, she reached for a rifle scope, one she had broken off from a battle fought in the past. She looked in on the camp's interior and the soldiers that slept. The vermin hadn't even left a guard on watch. Talia had been hunting these inexperienced soldiers for too long to know it was not a convenient trap. She was amazed half of them could tie their own shoes or fire their poorly assembled weapons. Talia descended on the second floor of the fire escape before letting go. Her robes flew up as she hit the ground on her feet. She stood and brushed herself off, replacing the scope inside her robe. She crept towards the entrance, her footsteps making no sound, and stopped at the center of the camp near their fire. Talia pulled the belt that held her robe together, and then reached for her katana. The unsheathing created just enough noise for one soldier to stir. He was frozen with fear at the sight of her weapon, polished so clear he could see his own horror. Talia grinned wickedly as she cast off her robe and threw it into the fire, smothering the flames and dousing the camp in darkness. The same soldier screamed out for less than a moment before Talia slashed him across the chest. The spray of blood caused another man to scream out. Talia followed the voices, stabbing and slashing as she made attack after attack. When the sound of gunfire finally discharged, she used the momentary lighting to find her next victim. Their clunky armor would not save them from her dexterity. When one thought she was in front and fired, Talia would be at their side before the bullet had hit its new mark. Her blade cut effortlessly through skin, bone, and muscle. Occasionally, a bullet would hit its mark, but Talia was only concerned about her head. She wore a hefty, armor-flex suit made from the Kevlar of fallen enemies. It was makeshift survivalist work at best, but it had never been pierced. Pieces of Kevlar made up her sleeves and covered her chest and back. She had also chosen to sew some of it into her black fatigues. Solid, yet thin ceramic plates at her knees, wrists, elbows, and abdomen protected her from harsh impacts, and her long black combat boots were tucked under her fatigues. One soldier grew brazen and went to rush Talia with the blade attached to his rifle. She parried the stab, then thrust a knee into his chest. The soldier fell to the ground. Talia raised her blade high, then brought it down through his head. She knew others were in the room by the way they dropped their weapons and increased their breathing. Talia had moved like nothing they had ever seen before. She sheared through two that were brave enough to try to evade her. Only one deeply breathing voice remained. This one would have use. The soldier could see the moonlight illuminated blood on her blade, but he could not see his assailant's face. "Your men in the building are gone," she said in Chinese. "Is there another camp?" There was no reply. Talia pointed her blade outward toward him, letting the light reflect off his face. It was another teenager, too scared to risk diving for his weapon and shooting while she was vulnerable. It made no difference to Talia, however. The child's fear had disarmed him long before he surrendered his weapon. "Speak," she called out. The soldier was about to cave when an unnatural sound came from overhead. Talia lunged and stuck her blade into the man's chest, retrieving it quickly and then making for clearer skies. The sound had come from a smoking aircraft that seemed to hover above a building in the distance. She had seen these used before by the Chinese, usually to bring in loads of soldiers. To her, this one looked different, unmarked by the normal symbols that coded the Chinese aircraft. Talia sheathed her sword and reached for a tie on her wrist for her hair. In a moment, she made out in a dead sprint, directly for the Hellchopper. "No," Alex stated harshly. "I'm going on the ground." "You need to sleep, kid," Jack replied. "And you need to put down that fucking flask, old man," Alex shot back. The two men were staring each other down in front of the rest of the team. Duigu watched from afar as he preferred. He could see visible wear on the faces of both men. Brandon thought Alex was a hard-ass, and even though he hadn't let the sniper avenge his men, part of him knew the young man could be trusted, and maybe even respected. "Calling out the old man on his drinking takes more guts than I have." "Neither of you are going anywhere," Duigu called out. "I've seen New Blood Marines with more rest than either of you." Alex turned his head towards the sniper. He wasn't angry. He was glad Brandon was finally speaking up. He looked back at the old man, who looked like he was about to lay into Duigu. Alex cut him off first. "You really want to keep this up?" he asked wearily. Jack threw him a nasty look. "He can't lead." The old man shook his head. "You want to lose more people, then put the guy who lost 20 of his own people in charge." "Yeah, you're one to talk about losses," Duigu replied, stifling the anger in his voice. "Enough!" Dellen yelled out. The doctor had finally had enough of sitting and watching the arguing from afar. The three men looked across the hold at the just as old doctor. There was a fire dimming in his eyes. "I'll lead one team, and Brandon will lead the other. Both of you Yanks get some fucking sleep." Jack threw up his hands as he made for one of the bunk rooms. "Y'all want to get yourselves killed, see if I give a fuck," he muttered under his breath as he reached the bunk room door, one hand reaching into his jacket. The entire team watched as he entered until the door slammed behind him. After a moment, Dellen focused his attention on Alex. "Don't make me yell at you two, kid." "You won't have to. Good luck down there," Alex replied. After Alex disappeared behind the other bunk room, everyone gathered around Dellen. The combat medic cleared his throat before speaking again. "Well then, who knows anything about this place?" Tommy, Mikhail, and Brandon all raised their arms. "You wanted to lead, Duigu? You're first," Dellen said. The sniper gave a quick nod. "Before I made it to Severnaya, a few mercs and I made a stop here for chopper parts. It was being used as a labor camp by the Chinese, but they didn't mind selling us a few bits and pieces if we left quickly. Tianjin must not have been bombarded directly, because a lot of the buildings are still standing upright. There are lots of good spots for snipers, and even better places for hiding soldiers," Brandon explained. "All right. We'll have to keep our eyes up then." Think you can find a high spot and watch us? Dallin asked. You got it, Deweyger replied. What about you, Tommy? The doctor pressed. Well, our bearded buddy is right about the buildings, but I made a run here about a year ago with a small group of thieves, and it didn't go well. Chinese have been using the Japanese that immigrated over for labor. At least that's what Sai said. He was part of a labor camp. He told me he'd escaped when one of the larger camps revolted against those child soldiers you all had the pleasure of greasing earlier. Anyway, we hit ground, and the next thing I know, we're surrounded by a bunch of soldiers with assault rifles. They didn't bother to ask what we wanted, but told Sai that if we so much as tried to re enter the city, we'd all be dead. Weird thing was that they weren't military. How can you be certain they weren't soldiers? Janet asked. They weren't wearing any of that stupid armor. A couple had white or black robes on. Looked like a group of people we didn't want to fuck with. Janet gave him a nod. Still went in, though, Tommy continued. Just took a different route. There's a million ways into this fucking place. And a million ways for locals to set traps, Mikhail added. Dealt with them too, Koslov? Dallin asked. Correct, Lieutenant. Once before the war and once after. History makes note of Japanese citizens escaping to the Senkaku Islands after a nuclear incident in Fukushima. Tensions became high, and I was dispatched on a reconnaissance mission, the Shadow explained. I still remember that, Otto said gravely. Think the old man and I were in Pakistan when the reports came in. News outlets said it was the worst nuclear event since Chernobyl. Yes, that was another reason I was dispatched. My government was interested in how that event would shift the course of global politics, Mikhail continued. The world was starting to fall apart between all the wars and lack of trust with nuclear power, Otto drummed on. What'd you find out, Ruski? Dell interrupted. Irrelevant data about farming locations and water treatment. However, I can confirm Chinese troop movements to retake the islands in 2016. Ruthless tactics like John Morrison's were used. Towns burned, men taken as labor slaves, women as sexual objects, and children either murdered or added to the Chinese military program, Mikhail explained. And you just watched? Layla asked. Yes. I had no other directive other than viewing the actions taken by the Chinese government, Mikhail responded, deafened to the hurt in her tone. And after the war? Dallin asked. An employer asked me to retrieve medical supplies from a hospital outside of the city. I was successful, though I encountered several members of the group Tommy described. They are religious cultists. I found several pieces of Christian paraphernalia in a camp and on several bodies of those who stood between me and the objective. They are well trained, fiercely territorial, and illogically volatile. Illogically volatile? You'll have to explain that, Janet said. While their dedication to their cause has freed them, they are emotionally overzealous regarding their faith. I was referred to as unholy, a demon. Reviewing the corpses of the Chinese soldiers revealed crosses etched with bladed weaponry. It is likely we are in the den of a tribal group with no concern for anyone who is not dedicated to their beliefs. Fucking hell, Tommy started. Abandoned buildings, deadly zealots, and a bunch of free parts. Glad I get to stay with the bird. Not this time, you bastard, Dallin said. We need you with the team to pick out the parts. We're also going to need some heavy lifting, so Otto's in too. The big man shook his head and reached for a light machine gun hanging in one of the cargo nets. Doc's just worried one of them scary zealots will get to him, the convict chuckled, loading a strip of linked ammo into the weapons chamber. Careful, Uncle Otto. Last thing you want is a cross-shaped tattoo from these assholes, Janet quipped. The big man let out another laugh as Dellin shifted his gaze to Tyler. Think we'll have enough firepower to bring down one of those buildings should we need a distraction, Patty? The doctor asked. I could rig something to make this entire city look like your home, Brit. Tyler let a smile come across his face as Dellin's creased. Good. Now here's what we're going to do. Tyler McGrath made Brandon nervous. There were few instances in his career where he had to work with explosive experts, That had been back in the old world military, with soldiers that underwent routine mental health inspections. Every time the man muttered something to himself, Brandon questioned the Irishman's expertise. Doing all right back there? Duigu asked, turning his head away from the scope. Just a bad wire. Almost put us in the drink, Tyler responded, trying to focus on the explosives. What? The sniper turned on his hip from his prone position, looking towards his partner. Oh, yeah. See, if I'd have crossed this red one with this other red one that's a green one in the wrong sheathing, we'd both be singing our way into that bay behind us. Brandon wasn't sure if he felt worried or relieved at that bit of information. His mind, now running in several different directions, chose for him. Why were the sleeves wrong? Brandon asked. Ragtag bullshit, cobbled together from some bomb maker's homebrew, manufacturing defect, or I suppose I could blame the old man for switching them on us. An explosives expert that can't think for himself would be of no real use on a suicide mission, would he? Tyler answered. The sniper shook his head. Sounds like the Jack Newsom I know, he said with a sneer. Ha! But lucky for us, I know what I'm doing. Could be that he didn't know, though. Not sure he'd go through all that effort. Hard to imagine he'd still be operating sloppy, given what happened on our first try, Brandon replied, spitting in the wind. Huh, where were you the last 48 hours? Tyler said, giving Brandon a harsh look as he began tying together the two green-sheathed wires. What are you doing? Duigu yelled out, reaching for the bomb. Tyler snatched the other man's wrist and twisted it around, and then looked up at the sniper. First off, never touch anything I'm working on. The tall Irishman let loose his grip of Brandon. Second, it was a goddamn joke. Third, you need to wake up and see how much of an asshole your old man really is. If Jack had any kind of plan for coming here, old Elias wouldn't be sitting in a body bag with a butcher's gash across his chest. Tyler crouched back down by the bomb and continued to tie the wires together. Brandon, however, was not finished with the conversation. You all want to demonize him, and I understand why, but the man makes mistakes just like you and me. If he didn't, there wouldn't be any reason for us to be here. Besides, can you really say Alex hasn't made any mistakes? I heard about your brother. Don't you blame him for that? Tyler pretended not to hear him as he continued with the bomb, taking moments to sip from his flask every few moments. I asked you something, Brandon repeated, walking back over and picking up the other man's flask. And if you try a cute joke like that again, I'll toss your drunken ass off this building myself. The sniper shot back Tyler's flask, expecting to be hit with all kinds of alcoholic foulness. The hydrating coolness of water splashed past his tongue and down his throat. My brother was the one who decided to make me part of this little band. I can't say I understood his reasons for all he did, including joining us up with Alex. My brother trusted him like he trusted me, and that made me jealous. When he died, all I could do was drink. It's only recently dawned on me that Van died doing what he believed in, and I was so caught up in looking for his approval that I couldn't see that. What made you stop the drink? Brandon asked, passing Tyler's flask back down to him. The same man I didn't want to trust when my brother told me our plans. The same man you're choosing to chastise over Jack. He isn't perfect, but I'll be damned if he hasn't tried to bring us all together instead of lying behind our backs. Tyler reached back for his flask and drained the rest of the water from the etched canteen of his family, then hooked it back to his belt. She's all set for their signal. Brandon, whose head was more divided now than 10 minutes ago, gave Tyler a nod. Fine. Help me get up the rope. Dellen felt like he had to watch Tommy's nervous movements more than their hostile environment. For all the stories Tommy told about his bravery in various parts of the world, the doctor thought him to be far too jumpy. Otto didn't seem to mind as he hefted a large crate with the rope that wrapped around its exterior. A large, if worn, label on its side listed ammunition. The big man was puffing on a cigar the size of his middle fingers. Seem a little shaky, Tom. You get anxiety attacks often? Dell asked as he felt around his jacket for his pill bottle. Air by the coast is just a little cooler than I'm used to, and it doesn't help that we've got 20 or so psychopaths with swords and guns staring down at us from these damn ghostly buildings, Tommy replied. You can't spend your life behind a cockpit, you know, Especially not on this job, Otto said, spouting smoke in the air. Speak for yourself, convict. You couldn't even fit in the seat, Tommy said. The larger man laughed as he slapped a meaty palm on the back of the pilot's head. You're all right, Gambiani. Tommy shook his head while rubbing the back of it. From afar, Dellen was not as impressed. He did, however, begin to take Tommy's meaning about the cold. The old medic was used to fog moving in on coastal cities, but Tianjin felt different than London. At home, many of the buildings were leveled by nuclear weapons. The ones that weren't were at least partially damaged or collapsed. Refuse would be scattered, shattered glass was common, and the roads were cracked. Tianjin held none of these characteristics. The buildings were being grown over by the local flora, and the ones that were damaged were by the hands of men, not their tools. See anything, Mikhail? Dellen asked through the comm. The shadow was stalking the alleys behind and beside the trio, checking as many facets of Tianjin's environment as he could. While it had been several years since he had surveyed this portion of China, Mikhail found its minor changes to be unremarkable. More trash here, a new broken window there. Nothing I have not observed before, he replied, climbing into a bread shop and watching the team from its windows. Indulge an old Brit one curiosity, would you? Dellen asked. Ask, Mikhail replied. You have any right idea of what weapon kills people but leaves a city intact? An airborne virus, local toxin, or large levels of radiation could lead to the massive extinction of a planned area. Yet I have not discovered any signs that would make those hypotheses correct, Mikhail replied. You're saying it could be something else? Dellen pressed. Not enough information. Though given China's history, refugees may have been militarized, enslaved, or simply murdered. The last would indicate the bodies were moved, however. Dellen was not at the ease he expected in speaking with Mikhail, though he had to wonder how many people would be. Thanks for the information, Red. Keep us updated, would you? Certainly. Dellen shook his head as he kept moving with Otto and Tommy. You and Jack had words? He asked in Otto's direction. The big man pulled from his cigar, though never retrieving it from his mouth. In one arm he carried the crate, and with the other he held his minigun sling. If that's what you want to call it, Dell. The captain is grasping for leads, and all he's finding is the fucking bottle. Eloquent, Tommy muttered under his breath, still shaking under his leather jacket. He eyed up at the nearby buildings. As much as he was afraid of the locals, the thought of an assassin watching his back was even worse. Old man doesn't talk, he gives orders, Otto continued. If you don't listen to them, he hides in that damn flask of his. He's lucky he found one of your stashes back in London. Remember the one with the 1780? Dellen stopped on his heels. You're telling me that my Yankee brother stole that 30-year-old bottle of whiskey just to keep himself in liquor? Otto set the crate down and leaned the minigun on its side. Well, not quite, the large man yawned. He gave it to Alex, along with the weapons you had stashed there. Otto reached for the canteen strapped to his ammo links. When he looked up, as he was sipping, he saw that Dellen had a blank stare on his face. What? The convict asked. I didn't leave any weapons in that cache. I scrapped all that nonsense years ago. Rovers didn't leave me any choice, Dellen answered. Otto shrugged as he drained some of the canteen on his head. Huh. Well, maybe the old man did have a few connections. Fairly sure Alex hasn't opened that bottle yet. Thing would stink up the whole bird if he had. I'm never going to understand that man as long as I... Dellen halted his speech mid-sentence, as his eyes happened upon a dark figure crouched in the shadow of a nearby building. The medic reached down for his pistol, while Tommy and Otto mirrored him with their own weapons. Koslov? Dell said with a whisper into the comm. I see her, the shadow replied. In a moment, the figure was up and sprinting. The steel of her blade extended outward from her body. She wore a dark armor he'd never seen before, though it appeared worn and scarred at its chest and shoulders. There was a crashing of glass. Mikhail rolled into a sprint after pouncing through the shop window. The Shadow and the Assassin were on a collision course, and Della knew only Mikhail could match her speed. The Shadow kept his hand on the hilt of his serrated blade. He had fought only one other person blade to blade, but Vito had been overconfident and swung wildly. He immediately recognized her person from Newsom's reports. This woman was Talia Shizari, the bullet-dodging legend, the progeny of what remained of the Japanese people in China. She went to slash across his chest, but Mikhail rolled, bringing his knife to parry her response to his movement. The katana caught right in the middle of one of the blade's serrated edges. Talia twisted to disarm Mikhail, but he was ready. He spun with the force she applied with her katana, sending him twisting to the ground. Talia pointed her blade downwards to finish her kill, but Mikhail rolled away as the blade sunk into the ground. For less than a moment, his glare shifted towards Dellen and the rest. They seemed enamored by what they were watching. The Shadow threw a hard kick into the zealot's shin. Instead of bringing her to the ground, he felt 2 or 3 of his toes crack from the force. The pain would not hamper him, but he knew the lack of movement would. "I can't do this alone," he said into the calm, hobbling to one foot as Talia pulled her blade from the earth. Mikhail caught the light plating that shattered his foot while she assumed a guard. In certain places it seemed like his suit, yet heavier. It presented as metallic, burnished black. The small pauldrons on her shoulders led to a chest and back plate, then stopped short of her abdomen and mid-back. A lighter material covered her midriff. The fatigue she wore seemed to be of the same composition. "What manner of foulness are you?" she yelled out in her native language that the database translated. Mikhail let his eyes shift to inspire fear, but she kept her hard stare. "What are you?" she repeated slowly, this time in English. It was a question even he couldn't answer. "Keep her still. Dell has an idea." The voice came in through Mikhail's comm. "A friend," Mikhail responded, keeping his blade extended away from his body. "I walk with the oppressed, not demons that have been gifted surreal power," Talia spat. He would have struck her if he could keep balance, but then he thought about her words. "You are not so different from those I choose to walk with," he countered. "My path is bestowed by God, my rock, my shield, my blade. With whom do you walk that allows you to claim equally?" she asked. The assassin sheathed his blade at his side. "Slaves, who have felt the worst tyranny man has to offer. They seek you out for the same reason they sought to find me." "A servant of God does not fight for hire, and you look nothing like a slave," Talia shot back. Her words were filled with vitriol. The Shadow felt emotion bubbling in his chest. It brought back the memories of his flashbacks where he could feel again. "I remember. Anger." The assassin pulled open his suit around his abdomen, revealing the many slash and puncture scars from years of torture he could only remember when he went under. "My scars may differ from yours, but do not mistake my presence for that of an oppressor," Mikhail said. Talia lowered her blade, staring at his gruesome flesh. "They coat my entire body. They were a gift from those who gave me no choice," he continued. As Dellen, Otto, and Tommy made their way over, Talia reassumed her guard without a second thought. Otto carried the netting from the crate, possibly to trap her, but Mikhail waved him off. "Are these who you tread with?" she asked as she glared at the convict's tattoos. "There are more. You saw the craft we approached in?" the Shadow asked. "Yes, I thought you were with the Chinese," Talia replied. "No," Tommy spoke up. "They were trying to kill us too. You must have seen the damage." The fit woman set her blade in its scabbard, but never took her eyes off Otto. "Their planes come here in similar states. They often seek supplies, as you no doubt were." Her gaze shifted back over to Mikhail. "How is it you know who I am?" Talia asked. "Lieutenant Johnston and prisoner 0110 know of you. You do not appear in my database apart from reports made by Captain Newsom." "Newsom?" she asked, undoing the tie in her hair, letting the black locks fall just short of her shoulders. I recruited a woman named Sifix to help in our fight 10 years ago. She didn't make it, Dellen interjected. Talia looked down at her feet. My mother. I was 11 when she left. My father was not pleased by her choice. That woman knew espionage. Chinese tried to trap us out of their allegiance to her. Told us we were responsible for her death and betrayal. She fed Jack data for years after the war ended, Otto explained. This ally of yours explained that you stand against oppressors, not unlike my own. May I ask if my mother died honorably? Otto looked over at Dellen, who gave him a nod before speaking. She would have had a better chance if we stuck to our plan, the big man explained. I am past her death. Did she die in an honorable manner? Talia repeated. Dellen did not want to answer. He thought back to his conversation with Janet. He knew Sifix had died for a cause, but he also knew she would be alive today if he had been with her. Yes, if there was any cause to give a life over, this was the one, Otto answered gruffly. Dellen bit his tongue. So you came here seeking aid? Her death is attached to failure, Talia said. Now wait just a second, Tommy started. Talia's blade extended as quickly as the pilot could blink, right under his chin. This is? She asked in Mikhail's direction. Members of our crew are content to call him a greaseball, the shadow answered. I'm curious about two things, sweetheart. You don't look like many of the locals, Tommy noted. Talia's head turned slowly back towards the pilot. My mother was French, my father Japanese. Now before I cut out your tongue, what else did you wish to ask? You always use that right hand to lead with that blade of yours? Tommy said with a grin. Talia tilted her head towards him out of curiosity. Tommy clicked his comm unit. There was an explosion in the distance that grabbed her attention. The top of a building went up in flames. The brightness made her lift her hands to shield her eyes. Then a concussive round slammed into Talia's sword hand, sending the blade vaulting towards Mikhail's instinctive grip. She fell to the ground, cursing in pain, blood dripping down her fingers. You might want to try with your left, Tommy said, strolling away from her. Not a bad shot, Brandon, he said into his comm. Suppose I owe you a beer. Dellen and Mikhail made their way over and kneeled at her side. Doesn't look too bad, Talia. Here, let me... With her uninjured hand, she pushed him lightly, then placed it on her displaced fingers, popping each in one dreadful moment at a time. You come here for my help, but shoot me first? She breathed in heavily as another finger snapped into place. How kindly do you take deadly weapons being pointed at you by unknown assailants? Dellen asked, moving in again with gauze and bandaging tape. Mikhail was careful with Talia's weapon, examining it while Dellen worked on her hand. Few would choose a weapon such as this against the ease of firearms, the shadow said, running a finger down along the blade's edge. Few choose to walk in God's light. Were I similar, perhaps I would wield trickery much as your people do, Talia responded. Trickery has saved my life quite a few times, miss. I assume that steak knife has done the same for you, Dellen replied. As Talia stood back up, the shadow offered her the katana, but tightened his grip on the hilt as her hand met his. I do not believe the next round will be concussive, Mikhail said as he let the blade go and watched her retract it into her scabbard. What can I call you? Talia asked. Mikhail Koslov. I'm glad I became acquainted with another warrior first. My people kill gaijin who seek to steal or wield such easily used tools. I am no warrior, Mikhail replied. Then what are you? Talia asked. A shadow. How's that for accurate, McGrath? Duigu asked, pulling from one of his cigars. Thought it would have taken her arm clean off, Tyler responded. She's lucky I had those on me, otherwise it might have, the sniper replied as he loaded a clip of regular ammo into his rifle. I'm better range shot than Eli was. course, of that I had no doubt. Would have been nice to have you a month or so ago. Why's that? He turned and looked up at Tyler, who was hovering over him. My brother, Tyler said short. Eli lost his scope while covering us in an ambush. If he hadn't, my brother might still be alive. Yeah, it's always the little shit that makes the difference, Brandon said as he looked back down the scope. The team looked to be getting along with the bladed woman better now, and the building next to them was smoldering to the ground. Ah, that it is. That why Jack sent you out in that frozen hell for 10 years? Tyler asked. It wasn't a missing scope that got me, McGrath. It was confidence in my ability. Out in Russia, I got better from that experience. As far as handling the turmoil, well, Brandon started rolling up one of his sleeves. We all have our ways of dealing. Tyler looked at the cut marks on Brandon's right arm. They all appeared self-inflicted in their parallel lines. Some were darker, some longer, and some touched so close that blotches of his skin were discolored. Otto has his tattoos, Jack has his flask, Mikhail has scars he never wanted. I have a 10-year canvas of pain. It started with some broken glass, cutting myself good when I threw an elbow into a window. It wasn't on purpose, it happened my first month in Siberia. I can remember all that anger I felt about screwing up just washing away with the blood. Every time I've had a shard in me, I probably scream like a child. Tyler shrugged. Don't get me wrong, picking glass from my elbow still hurts like a motherfucker. At the same time, it gave me something new to focus on. Depression has a bad way of making someone feel invincible. You put yourself in harm's way because you want a way out. When I started making myself bleed, it reminded me that I was human. I replaced one pain for another, and in a way, I freed myself from the emotions that held me back, Brandon explained. I wonder if Kozlov would agree with you about that, Tyler replied. Regardless of what I think about him, he may be the only man who walks this earth without knowing what emotion is. People like me crave that, but he never even asked for it, Brandon said. What I can't understand is how a man has the fortitude to survive the shit he went through. Those ice pick scars look like they run deep. Who knows what the hell else happened to him, Tyler noted. I still can't believe one man killed most of my men, Brandon retorted. He could probably kill us all if he wanted to, Tyler replied. I've got my eyes half open when I bunk, but if Alex trusts him, then I have to abide it. You still plan on killing him if we get through all this? Tyler asked. Brandon pulled the hammer back on his rifle and looked back into the scope, watching the ground team moving on. It's not a plan, McGrath. It's a promise. Otto trudged ahead at the front of the group, with a crate heaved over his shoulder. Dallin and Tommy followed behind while Mikhail was helped along by Talia. Have you traveled here before? She asked. Mikhail tried to hurry his hobbling. He wanted to be careful with how he answered. For now, Talia might have been calm, but only a few minutes ago, she was trying to cut him in half. Not that I can remember. My memory has eluded me recently. It is not a place I want to remember, she replied. Why stay to fight then? Mikhail asked. I have no choice, Talia replied. The Chinese forspoke their right to this land long before I was born. There is a blood debt I must repay to the heretics that brought this war on themselves. Her words brought Mikhail back to his original estimation of her people. They were ruthless in accepting any other word than their own, even in the face of logic. Her fervor gave him pause, not out of fear, but respect. She had a reason to fight. Mikhail fought because he had been told to, or because it was all he knew. Was I similar in my last life? You may let your feet drag, if you wish, Talia said, stirring him from his thoughts. You're lighter than most bodies I have had to haul about this forsaken place. He realized his thinking had stopped, the motion on his feet. It was easier, but he immediately began to hobble on his right foot. Life is not easy. Talia ignored his hobbling and continued their conversation. If malcontents deserved this land, they would have taken it back from those they call slaves.
Do you believe this is a war your people can win? Mikhail asked.
Whether or not we can defeat them does not matter. They are vermin. They will die because they are filth, or I will die ridding their kind from this earth, Talia replied.
Belief's hallmark, Mikhail mumbled as he tried to keep his left foot hoisted above the ground.
What? Talia asked.
Nothing, he replied. I was clearing my throat. I am not used to the air here.
You should feel lucky. Beijing's air is worse, Talia said as she looked ahead at the rest of the group.
So what am I carrying for you, Tom? I hope it's worth the effort I'm putting into lugging this shit around, Otto asked.
It's plating for the inner and outer hull so we don't freeze to death when I decide to go high altitude. Unless being an icicle's on your bucket list, the pilot replied.
Otto laughed as he trudged on forward.
What about the engines? Dellen asked. We're probably going to have to find an airbase for that. It's not exactly like these people left turbine engines lying around in their coffee shops, Tommy said sarcastically. Yeah, you found steel sturdy enough to plate a hellchopper, Dellen pressed. Hey, I might not be able to turn a dead zone into a B-rated med clinic, but I know how to weld metal, Doc. Give me a little credit here, Tommy said. Dellen shook his head. He'd sooner entrust his life to the rovers back home than to a greaseball bastard like Tommy, but personal preference was in short supply on this mission. That broad might know where we can find engines, the pilot went on, jutting a thumb back towards Mikhail and Talia. Whole ones, hopefully. Little pieces might take me a week or 3. Just like a Yank. 5 minutes ago you thought she was going to cut your jimmies off. Now you're calling her a broad like you've known her all your life, the doctor spat. Don't mean I ain't keeping an eye on her, Doc. Were you any different when you met Alex? Tommy asked. Dellen waved him off. Point taken. Damn right, you old Tommy mumbled under his breath. Doctor, Talia yelled out, watching Mikhail convulse to the ground. The medic only looked back for a moment before he started sprinting for Koslov's limp body. He's still breathing, but it's faint. Shit. The doctor stared down helplessly. Can you do nothing for him? Talia yelled out. I wish I could. Our man here has a mild case of narcolepsy, or something to that effect, Dellen explained. I don't understand. Will he be all right? Talia asked. Bastard woke up trying to kill me last time, but he'd be all right. I can explain more on the way. Let me help you lift him up.